You're listening to The Big Lift, the podcast of WebTrends Optimize, the CRO solution that enables marketers and developers to maximize the ROI on their digital properties. WebTrends Optimize is a powerful, feature-rich and easy-to-use solution, all delivered within a fixed-price contract with no additional cost for increased functionality ever. During these podcasts, we meet some of the key influencers within the marketing and conversion world to understand their roles and examine their challenges. Covid-19 has impacted the working lives of almost everyone in 2020. With total lockdown in late March to the second wave upon us, there have been over 600,000 people who have been made redundant, and the possibility of many more once the furlough scheme ends. The long-term effect of Covid is still unknown. We're having to adapt to the new normal and brace ourselves for another recession, one which could have greater impact than the financial crisis of 2008. But could this be the time where change brings opportunity? Today I'm speaking with Ben Rayner, co-founder of Zengility, a professional services organisation that specialises in work-life transformation and the creation of lifestyle businesses. We discuss how, with a positive attitude and openness to change, Covid-19 could be the catalyst to alter your work-life balance for good. Ben, could you give me a little bit of background as to what Zengility does? And also, what made you move from CHS after nearly 18 years?
Yeah, so in a nutshell, Zengility is a professional services company that specialises in creating lifestyle businesses for senior execs. In terms of the second part of your question, is a really, really interesting question because, you know, like you rightly pointed out, I had been sort of working agency side for nearly 2 decades and decided to make a leap of faith. Now, at the time, I know a lot of people were sort of saying to me, you know, you've got a great opportunity at CHS. You've got a mortgage, you've got 2 young kids. We're on the precipice of Brexit. You know, is this really a good time to do that? But I felt it was. And from my perspective, this sort of came back to an earlier conversation I'd had with my now business partner, Paul Stevenson, in a hotel in 2018, and we sat down and we had a number of conversations, and one of the conversations we had from sort of 2018 onwards was his sharing his vision of the future, a vision that he'd sort of had, you know, nearly a decade ago. And when we were having that discussion about his vision and sort of batting it backwards and forward, I decided it was time. And it was the time for me to sort of take the plunge. And I used all that knowledge of branding and all that knowledge and wisdom that I sort of gathered over those 18 years. And I extracted the essence out of Paul, you know, so that we could express his vision. And that was really the birth of Zengility. The collective insights fused the business together. And we were the perfect blend, and that's why Zengility came about. And it was one of the things that it's probably quite recently actually. I was sort of thinking back to the thing that made the gear shift for me, because I have been asked that question by a few people, including some of our clients. You know, it's quite a long time to be somewhere to then make the move. You know, so why would you decide to make that move? And it's something I reflected on quite recently. And probably the best way of illustrating that is, you know, when today's so from my side, by the way, agency side, I worked with a lot of big corporate brands in finance, in food, in retail, you know, across the board, you know, and when these super brands that are today, these super brands of today set up, they would have had a really, really clear purpose. And I felt like this purpose had got lost on the journey and was maybe starting to portray a false sense of self. So, for instance, there would be marketing campaigns that were run, and those marketing campaigns might be about making things better for the customer. But in reality, they were maybe customer benefits that sat within the product anyway, and the brand didn't actually have a huge amount to talk about. So our job was to make these benefits come to life and make them feel like they're great benefits for the customer. And for me, that didn't really deliver customer-centric value, because it wasn't like they designed something for the customer. It was something that already existed that we were now going to promote. And actually, when these were challenged from can we make this better by doing X, Y, and Z? 9 times out of 10, operationally, that wasn't possible. So I started to question whether I was actually delivering a customer-centric proposition, or whether we were sort of starting to paint over the cracks. And then you couple that with individuals joining corporations who are able to perform that task, but maybe don't share the purpose in the brand. Then you start to create frustration within the individual, and things start to boil over, and then you end up with sort of a fractious world within that organization. And I think that it was probably that made me felt unfulfilled. There may be other people out there who, now I've illustrated that, can resonate with that thought.
So do you think that thought was already within you, and it was Paul that managed to bring that idea to the forefront?
That's a good question. Paul has a unique ability to transform individuals, and without a doubt, he's very good at making you think in a different way and explore different ways of thinking. And I would certainly say he was a catalyst for that. So he would definitely be. And whether it existed for years and years, I guess we probably all wrestle with it. So I'd have sat there thinking, actually, this is my destiny, and I can't see a way out of that, because I've been here for so long. What else could I possibly do? I've spent the best part of 2 decades crafting what I knew, and the thought of going somewhere else to another agency just didn't seem like a sensible decision. And I guess starting on my own at the time probably didn't feel like a sensible move, because I didn't really have a wish to start up an agency. But I think I have a funny feeling we all sort of box ourselves into our own worlds, and we almost create a set of rules for ourselves that ultimately don't exist. And when we can recognize that, and we can turn that on its head, and if you like, in marketing world, we call it clear space, i.e. you create a brand and there's clear space around it so people don't operate in that space. Actually, from a humanistic point of view, I would talk about clear space as the ability to be able to think, because I think we get also task driven in our environments that we don't give ourselves space to think. And when you don't give yourself space to think, problems can seem insurmountable, and ideas don't flow, and actually work becomes work rather than play.
Before we move on, I think it's probably worthwhile just trying to understand exactly what Zengility does.
Zengility was originally set up in and around the changing world of work. Paul, as I said earlier, shared a vision with me around the world of work changing. Now, what's been really, really interesting is, of late, the current sort of blessing and curse. We've seen a massive shift in how things have changed. So prior to March, working from home was for the chosen few, and now it's for the masses. And we're now at a tipping point where, because people have been sat at home, they've possibly had a little more chance to reflect about what's important to them. And I think we all need to recognize now that if you've got a burning desire inside you, then you should action that, because otherwise you're going to be a tormented soul. At the end of the day, Zengility was founded to enable people to find their purpose and define it to a commercial reality. So ultimately, we take an individual, Paul works on them on their mindset transformation. We then develop their authentic perception, which is the truth of them expressed, and take them to market through our various launch services that we have.
One of your headlines is working 3 days a week, 10 months of the year. That sounds like nirvana. And is it going to be realistic for many?
Well, I'd ask the question of why does everyone feel that working 5 days a week is a necessity?
Well, I think money must drive a lot of that.
Yeah, well, I just think we've just been conditioned to do it that way. But it goes back to the discussion we had before around choice, and around space. And if you don't have space, then it will become work. And you can go and have a look anywhere. There was an article actually in Forbes magazine recently in and around the Zoom call and how business leaders in certain areas of the world now are now condensing Zoom calls to 15 minutes. Now, I'd suggest that they're condensing Zoom calls to 15 minutes for brevity and for clarity, which makes me think that actually work expands to fill the day. We've all been sat there in meetings thinking, do I actually need to be here? What have I actually contributed? Could this have been done in a faster pace? We all travel to work, or used to all travel to work at the same time. You could see the ripple effect of stress. People trying to drop their kids off first thing in the morning. Everyone's doing the same thing at the same time. When I was speaking to Paul in the early days, I used this analogy of you imagine an alien landing in one of the tube stations in London at sort of 7:30, 8:00 in the morning, and he sort of sat there going, "Yeah, what's going on? Is there a fire? Where's everyone going? Do we all need to get on the same train together?" They're all sort of crammed into the tube together, and the guy turns to him and says, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Well, why is everyone rushing? Why is everyone going the same way at the same time in the same place?" He's like, "We're all going to work," and you can see when you look at that, as an outsider looking in, that seems like a crazy thing. Why is everyone trying to get to the same place at the same time? What we're effectively saying is that you, John, me, everybody sort of is working at the same pace at the same time. Well, some people work better in the morning. Some people work better in the evening. So actually there's an argument to say that individuals should be given some form of flexibility to be able to work when not necessarily is appropriate for them, because there needs to be some cohesion. But actually, if you've got to drop your kids off, why force people in for 8:30 in the morning? Why not give them a bit of a buffer? Because actually you would just reduce stress in the workplace. You see people when they're dropping their kids off, if they could push their kids out of a moving car because they're in a rush, they probably would. It's just crazy.
So you say that work expands to fill the day, and that's maybe the case across certain areas. But do you think we're unproductive for a lot of the day?
I think there's enough studies out there to, and I was one of these people, back in the day. Agency life, overtime is an occupational hazard in agency life, or it certainly was when I was there, and I can't believe it's changed in this short period of time. But when I look back, I would really question how efficient I was, especially after a working week. And I know myself, by the weekend, I was exhausted. I was mentally exhausted. And I keep relatively fit as well. So imagine if you weren't fit, how exhausted you would be. So, and there's enough studies out there around efficiency, how long people can actually concentrate for. So I think there is another way, and we all have access to multiple choices, but we all limit ourselves. There are multiple ways of doing this.
I understand the concept of this 3 days a week, 10 months of the year. But for those people who have voluntarily given up their jobs, and all that entails, that's the salary and the fringe benefits, etc., how do they manage to reconcile the differences between the working life they had before and this new working life?
Everyone deals with it differently, is the honest answer. There isn't, certainly from Zengility's point of view, there isn't a cookie cutter approach. If we to think about retail, for instance, they're in an interesting space, depending on obviously which sector they're working in within that sort of retail space. Grocery is possibly an exception, but you can see even within grocery how things are starting to shape differently now, because over the period where we were all hunkered down in our own homes, a lot of people were forced to transact in a way that maybe they traditionally hadn't had to transact. And there's enough data out there, you can go and rake around for yourself to show that there's actually been growth in the online space, which obviously fits quite neatly into the Web Trends Optimized proposition. But we've also seen declines of other sectors. Can't go on holiday when no planes are flying, and Bournemouth Airport was was testament to that. And we had probably most of the BA fleet parked up on the runway all the way down. The whole airport was just covered in various planes. I've never seen anything like it. So things have changed in these different sectors. But if we think about the retail space, we've got to question whether some of these jobs are actually going to come back. We've got execs out there looking for retail jobs. I'd suggest certainly in the short term and potentially further down the line, there's going to be a shortage of those jobs. And you would question whether some of those jobs are actually going to come back. So individuals, through redundancy, I suspect, are going to be forced down a road. They're not going to have, that's not going to be an option because there's going to be a shortage of jobs. So they're going to have to find another way to create a sustainable income. And it's that Zengility is able to help. Redundancy we see as a release for a lot of people. Actually, when they've gotten through the early days of crossing the chasm post redundancy, they can actually have a real chance to step back and think about what they want to do going forward. And there's no reason why those individuals can't set up a lifestyle business or become $1 million consultant.
So I can definitely see it from those people that have been made redundant, that those people in the early stages of the change curve, which would be thinking, this is a great time for me to be able to change my way of working. But for those people who are perhaps more institutionalized and are used to the 9 to 5:30 working week, it must be more challenging for those people to actually voluntarily give up their job and try to establish themselves in this new world order.
I would argue that there's no such thing as permanent employment. In January, I think we all would have a different perception to now about what safe and secure looks like. I think we just don't know what's around the corner. And I would question this notion of permanent. The world's completely changed. You only have to look at where the world was for the generation that's ahead of me, where the majority of people had a job for life. That then changed to, when you looked at the CV, if you hadn't stayed somewhere for the best part of 10 years, most people would have looked at you and said, well, you're not particularly loyal and you're likely to flip from one thing to the next. And actually now it's more common to see people spending, 1, 2, 3, 4 years in an organization and, moving with, the thing that attracts them to the next role. So I think everybody's institutionalized. I think that was your first question, wasn't it? I think everybody's institutionalized, and that institutionalization has developed certain behaviors because you condition yourself to thinking or operating like that. And let's not forget that the sort of the heartbeat of what we created was off the back of Paul's vision. And Paul's vision, was really the best part of 25 years of insight and research through EgoStream, which currently saw a lot of these problems coming further down the line. So the system is changing. The system is definitely changing. So you can either wait for the accident to happen, or you can think ahead and start doing something about it. That's the way I would look at it. And I think there are different proportions of the population who act and react in different ways. You could argue there's never a good time to go out on your own. I mean, we touched on that earlier. I've got a mortgage, I've got 2 young kids. Brexit was on the horizon. If someone had chucked the pandemic in there as well, was that a good time? I don't know. I've tried to look at these things as a positive rather than as a negative, and I've tried to find the positives off the back of these. What most people spend all their time doing is looking at the doom and gloom, and I think that's potentially driven by the things that they read. So I would say that going forward, you might not have a choice. At the moment, I believe we've all got multiple choices, but we limit ourselves. And I think there are multiple ways to achieve the same goal. But I believe that what we've set up is future-proof for tomorrow's economy.
We've touched on briefly the effects of COVID-19. Do you think this new normal is going to become normal, or is it just a phase?
Depends what you're referencing.
I'm thinking more about, the work environment and people, as you say, the 9 to 5 kind of regime that we've been used to for the last 20, 30, even longer years.
Mm.
Do you think it's going to change? I mean, we're hearing a lot of businesses saying, well, we might not go back to how we were before. We might have, only be in the office once a week or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think this has forced companies to review what they're doing and how they're doing it. And I think Jack Dorsey of Twitter was one of the first to come out and basically say the staff didn't have to ever come back to work again, i.e., in the office. And I think a lot of other businesses have followed suit. I think the city, i.e., London, has seen an increase in office occupancy now becoming more available. You can see now that there's mutterings from businesses in the city, and I suspect this will ripple down everywhere, that things are going to change. I think we've seen co-working spaces have to, rethink the structures. I'm sure you guys up at Web Trends Optimize have had to adapt accordingly. And, I think we're going to see, at the end of the day, I think we are going to see changes across the board in terms of the working patterns. Look, it wasn't that long ago where flexible working wasn't really a thing, and I would suggest that potentially that the opportunities that arose off the back of, I suppose, predominantly working mums pioneered to a greater or lesser extent of being able to work blocks of time, when people started to recognize actually they still add value, but they're working in a very different way. I think we're just going to see an evolution of that. That's what we're dealing with here, is an evolution. And we will just evolve with it. And I don't think anyone's got the master sheet. I don't think everybody working from home all the time is a solution. I don't think everyone going back to work and going back to the old normal is a solution. I think it's potentially going to be a blend of the both, where there's probably less pressure on the employee to go to work, and there's probably, i.e., 5 days a week. And I think they'll be able to work as efficiently, if not more efficiently, at home. Because don't forget, how much time is lost traveling, and that in itself can create a really stressful environment for the individual when they reach work. If they've had a bad journey, they then sit in the office and tell the rest of their team about how bad their journey is, and then that ripples through. And then how much time is then lost in the office over a conversation about the traffic? We've all been there. We've all been a party to those conversations. It's a bit crazy. But if that individual was sat at home, you've potentially got another hour back in their diary that you didn't have before, and that's energy. That's what you've got there, is energy. That energy has been lost because that energy has been used traveling to and from work, and I think it could be used in a better way. And then you've also got to look at the CEOs, especially those with that are maybe venture capital backed or on the FTSE, or they're looking at their big cost, and their big cost is often headcount. And so they'll look at their businesses and they'll start to analyze their business and start to shape it with potentially a bunch of core workers, and then something that's a little bit more flexible outside of that, which is where I believe, and we will see the rise of this individual coming into an organization, adding their value for potentially hours, not even days, and then working for 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 different organizations over the period of 2, 3, 4 days a week.
That surely brings up a lot of fear in people. I would suggest that their old way of working is potentially no longer there, especially those that are being made redundant, and that they have to find not just a different job, but a different way of working as well. And a lot of people wouldn't necessarily have the right structure to be able to do that themselves. Do you think it's something that's going to be forced upon people, or do you think it's something that people will take more voluntarily and think, well, actually, I could do with spending less time at work or less time commuting, and this portfolio career, that is, I think, what we're discussing, will become much more prevalent in the years to come?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think it will. I think it will evolve. Some people are going to be forced down that road, as we discussed earlier. Those who are unfortunate to have been made redundant may find that the job that they're looking for has probably 10 times the amount of applicants applying for it than another job. And I think we're starting to see that now. I think there was a publican in London who had the best part of 1,000 people apply for a barn person's job, and he's just like, this is just unprecedented. And I'm sure he's not the only one. I'm sure there are potentially less roles out there at present, and potentially more redundancies on the horizon, unfortunately. And I empathise with those. And this is what we were talking about before. Are you going to wait for the accident to happen? Or are you going to do something about it now? So I think it'll be an evolution, is the answer to your question. I think some people might be forced into it through redundancy, and they'll just have to reevaluate. And I think other people will make the leap potentially beforehand and try a new thing. I think there's an old phrase, isn't there, that talks about everyone likes progress, but nobody likes change.
Looking at the individuals inside of this and their move from being fully employed to being potentially this portfolio career or having a portfolio career, there's an awful lot of instability in that. And I think if you look at the numbers of redundancies, there is definitely going to be future months and quarters and maybe even years of recession. And if the working environment is changing so dramatically, do you see that there has to be more input from government to be able to sustain those people who are once normally working 9 to 5 in a secure job that are just trying to be able to get a portfolio career together?
I think the future is actually quite bright, if I'm honest with you. I just think it's just not going to be executed maybe in the way that it has been in the past. In terms of whether government intervenes or not, I'm not sure I'm qualified enough economically to be able to sit down and put that
Yeah.
spreadsheet together on what's required. So I just look at this as an evolution and a change where there's no reason why, if you don't design your life, you can't earn the same amount of money, and if that's what you're looking for, but actually be working less hours in the week. Because is it about the amount of time you spend in an organization, or is it about the amount of value you drive off the back of the time you spend in the organization?
I think we're probably talking on a different level, which is it's about the feeling of security. And security brings a level of comfort, if you like, to the individual and allows them to be able to be either productive or unproductive. But I think the fear that people are going through who are being made redundant and hearing that there's a big recession and there's not just them being made redundant, but thousands of others, that fear is often paralyzing. And to be able to say, can I look at doing something entirely different, will be alien to a lot of people because they're not conditioned that way. And I think that whilst there is, when there is change, there is opportunity. I just think there's so much change and so few potential opportunities at the moment that it's going to be tough for an awful lot of people. Would you think that's correct? Or do you think that actually by changing their own attitude, they can actually make life work differently?
Yeah, I've no doubt that fears in a lot of people's psyches when change is occurring, because people are looking for some form of security, and that security often comes with being part of a tribe or a company. But actually, you can recondition your mind. You can recondition those bits of your mind and think very differently, and you can either paralyze yourself with fear, or you can drive out a certain outcome just by pioneering and trailblazing a new way. So I'm sure there are going to be people who are paralyzed by fear, and I'm sure there are those who are going to do very well off the back of this, who think that there is an opportunity and a different way of doing it. And I think that's the same in anything. I think that's the same across the board, isn't it? Whenever there's a downturn, there are people, there are individuals, there are companies who thrive off the back of that, and equally there's the other side of it, who when things are good and things are growing, people thrive off the back of that. So I think there are opportunities in upturn and downturn economies. I think the economy where you probably are going to struggle the most is when it's flatlining.
You've mentioned this portfolio career, or whatever we call it, this ability to work more flexibly. Do you think that's as much apparent in having a single company rather than having a portfolio career? So instead of working 5 days a week, 40 hours a week, you could say, actually, I'm only going to work 4 days a week, and I'll do as as much production in those 4 days that I did in 5? Or do you think that's just a leap too far?
That's probably a knee-jerk reaction to circumstance. If you wanted to chop down that seems like a logical. It's a bit like water; it finds the easiest route down, doesn't it? That feels
Yeah.
like an easy solution. I'd suggest that actually just working smarter would reduce that. So the portfolio lifestyle business, which we're obviously specializing in, is a way where you can bring your specialism and define your purpose, and we can help you bring it to a commercial reality. And that's where you'll have the opportunity to, look at the opportunities that are out there and be able to collect those based on your specialism. And I think businesses in this economy are going to be looking for specialists to help them solve various challenges that they have within their organization.
Is this portfolio lifestyle or, change of working achievable for only those that have financial stability? Is it probably not open to people who are living more hand to mouth?
Not at all. I think everyone can access it. I think Zengility has just chosen to specialize in senior execs. So I think it can be for all. I think it is doable for all. That's kind of like the birthplace of the entrepreneur, isn't it? Mark Zuckerberg wasn't a millionaire when he set up Facebook, and I'm not saying he's necessarily the example that we're trying to send people to the moon from Zengility's point of view. But entrepreneurs come in many different shapes and sizes. They don't just become, they don't start as millionaires and become billionaires. They normally start from quite humble beginnings, don't they?
One of the questions that I'm intrigued because of this headline of, achieving 3 days a week and 10 months of the year, do you have a good list of your clients who've actually managed to achieve that? Or do they suddenly go back into, well, I'm still working, but I'm still working 5 days a week and I'm still working, 12 months of the year?
I think it's transitional is the honest answer, because it's a bit like anything. You need to practice it to be able to become efficient at doing it. And it's not like a light switch. You can't just flick the switch and it'll happen. It's a bit like the evolution of what we're dealing with at the moment. It's not a switch that you flick and you almost become expert at it. You have to master it. And I would suggest that I'm still mastering it now. It doesn't happen overnight. And you just become better and better and better at becoming really outcome focused in what you're trying to achieve and trying to break those old habits.
And does it work for you?
Oh, it's transformational, absolutely transformational, because you're creating space in your life, you're creating space in your brain, and when you've got that type of space, your clarity of thought is so much better, and your decision making becomes superb and on point.
Just in, this is much more general terms, as we draw this podcast to a close, but there's many thousands of people being made redundant in the retail space. And by that, I don't necessarily just mean the senior execs and things like that. I mean, the shop floor workers and people like that. Is this really potentially open to those people who are working in that kind of environment?
Yeah, I think so. I think you need an intrinsic passion, and once you've got that passion, you can find your purpose, and you can go out and you can get it. And it's not, at the end of the day, not everybody wants to do that. Not everybody wants to set up their own lifestyle business. So it's a bit like anything. There are going to be those who feel more comfortable being employed, and there are those who are going to feel like, actually, this is maybe the future, and I need to look to the future. And I have got a burning passion inside me that I want to get to market, and they'll work to do that. I think the retail's a really interesting space at the moment. Retailers, having worked there myself, I think retailers have multiple skills. They are, they really are, skilled in doing lots and lots of different things. So I think there's a super opportunity for those in retail to go and test their skills and look at other opportunities outside of that space. If they can't find what they're looking for in that space, or like I said before, if they've got a burning passion inside them to go and do something new. So yeah, I think it's super, and we'll circle back to it. Web Trends Optimize it is going to see the springboard off the back of that, because retailers are having to adapt now to a different environment where customers and have been almost forced down a route to transacting online. And I think we're going to see the growth of that industry. And you guys are superbly placed with your unique proposition to help, those retailers either looking to maximize the online space, and if they're not in that space, they're going to have to get in that space fairly quickly, because the high street is changing, the high street is evolving. Some might say it's even the high street's almost going back to how it was, with the sort of boutique artisan bakeries and butchers appearing, and the local butcher and all of that sort of stuff, and the health food stores, and then we're going to see maybe more out of town shopping. I don't know. I mean, the luxury good market, that'll be interesting to see how that shapes up. Be interesting to see what happens on the in terms of the casual shopper, and whether they go back to that experience, or whether they're actually comfortable transacting online. I think there's an evolution occurring, and I don't think anyone's got the silver bullet or the magic key, but there's definitely evolution happening.
So, based upon your and Paul's vision of the future, there must be space for an equivalent Airbnb for what I would describe as part-time isn't really the word, but portfolio career people. Do you, other than people per hour, which I know, and one or two others, there doesn't seem to be anything that's big in that space. Do you think that's an evolution that will happen pretty quickly?
It's a great idea. Why not? Why not? An opportunity isn't lost. It's normally picked up by somebody else.
That's very, very philosophical, that is. That's absolutely right. So I got that one first. So any royalties or anything like that? I'm sure Paul will be jumping on that. Ben, it's been a great conversation. Very topical, I know, with lots of changes going on in the employment world today. I'd like to be able to revisit maybe in 6 months to see what the outcome of COVID has been, or the fallout of what COVID has been, and perhaps see how the future is moulding itself in the not too distant future.
That'd be great. And it's been a super call, John. And I look forward to catching up with you in the not too distant future. Thanks again.